as homeschool moms, we want our kids to have a love of learning. And some of the best ways to do that, in my experience, is to follow those rabbit trails and to be willing to take a second and take a break from the curriculum and just follow that thing that's really interesting to them.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked Podcast. I'm so glad you are back with Katie and I today. This is Katie Waalkes. Did I say that right, Katie?
Yes, you did.
Nice. I'm so proud of myself. Waalkes. That's a fun last name. People know I love different last names. My last name is just kind of mundane, as you might say. Katie from Life and the Mundane. Just Hampton. I mean, I don't dislike it. It's a fine last name, but it's not exciting. Though my first name, I have stopped giving my first name when, you go to a restaurant and they'll ask for a name, for, to get a table or for, picking up your order. And when I say Yvette, most of the time they get this look on their face like, huh?
Yeah.
And they either try to spell it Evet or they never know how to spell it. And then if I try to spell it for them, they're like, Yeve. Never mind. So I just start giving them either Hampton or which they mess that up too. Usually I'll just say Brooklyn or Lacey because those are pretty easy to understand. But it's quite funny. So yeah, someone the other day, she's like, it's a very different name. I said, thank you. It's French. I'm not French, but my name is French. Anyway, we are glad to have you back with us, Katie. Thank you for joining me. We're going to get back into our conversation. We are talking about the highly distracted homeschool mom. But before we do, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, CTC Math. If you guys are looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com. Try them out for free, ctcmath.com. Well, Katie, okay, we're talking about the highly distracted homeschool mom. And one of the things you said on Monday, which by the way, if you guys missed Monday's episode, go back and listen to that. But one of the things you said was that there are actually some strengths to being highly distracted. And I was like, oh, this is good to know. I always want to know the good things. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. What are some of the things that are strengths that we can derive from being highly distracted moms?
I think one of the big ones is that as homeschool moms, we want our kids to have a love of learning. And some of the best ways to do that, in my experience, is to follow those rabbit trails and to be willing to take a second and take a break from the curriculum and just follow that thing that's really interesting to them. And as highly distracted homeschool moms, oftentimes we are more willing to do that and to kind of go off the beaten path. And I really do think that's a strength. I have friends who are very type A and who very much wish they could. They're like, but to us, that to-do list is such the driving force that we have trouble taking the opportunity to dig into something. And so I found that to be a huge strength across the board. And not that we don't ever struggle with doing that. And obviously we can't do that 24/7. But, being able to say, you know what, guys, that's a great question. Let's look more into that. Maybe we're going to watch a documentary or listen to a podcast on that or read a book on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But sometimes what I find myself doing, and I totally agree with you because we will often do that too. But then we'll go on YouTube to look at a video on something and then, look at this video.
Yes.
2 hours later, oh, wait a minute. We were supposed to be learning about Pompeii or whatever it was that we were studying. And so it can lead to more distraction. However, that also can be a learning opportunity for our kids because you never know what the Lord is going to show you, maybe something that you didn't even know you needed to know about.
Yes.
Or talk to your kids about.
Another one that I found is definitely been the ability to pivot. Life has a lot of things that just happen and pop up, and the ability to take that opportunity to make shifts and adjustments fairly quickly is something oftentimes we can do. Now we can, with every strength, there is a weakness. Every weakness, there's a strength. So it's always finding that balance there. But, there's more of a willingness to stop and to do moments of ministry, and to take the opportunity with our kids to, be willing to take a break from things, to be able to pivot over to maybe a discipline issue, heart issue that needs to be addressed. And so it's one of those things that I really do think is a strength, because God gives us very specific things for a very specific reason. And another big one has definitely been with my kids having more understanding, because whether kids have ADHD or don't have ADHD, kids are highly distracted as a whole, as a general rule. And as parents, sometimes we can get so far removed from that and have so many strategies that we lose empathy, or we forget that there's actual strategy that has to be learned. And so we just assume our kids should be little adults. And so I feel like by having those struggles, and even though some of them are not current struggles, some are still, even though some of them are not current struggles, they're recent enough that I remember what I had to do to learn how to pivot and how to grow in those areas. And I'm able to teach my kids better and equip them better because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's called flexibility.
Yes.
And you're right. I think for the type A mom, it is very hard for her sometimes to be flexible. And again, I mean, I'm not putting down type A moms.
No,
I
not at
often
all.
aspire to be that type A mom where like, I really want to have it all together. I want to be able to organize my day and live by my schedule. It's just not me. And like you said yesterday, or in Monday's episode, it's not that we stay there. It's not that we say, well, this is just how I am, so I'm just going to stay here, and well, too bad for my family, right? We should always be growing and learning. And so, and I know we're going to talk about some methods. I'm assuming one of them will be, because I know it has been the top method for me, is making a to-do list.
Yes.
If I didn't have a to-do list and a calendar to live by, oh dear, I would not be able to function. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for that type A mom, there are so many benefits to being organized and structured and focused, but it's really hard for that type A mom to pivot, as you said, and to be flexible when your day doesn't go exactly as planned. And so I think it's hard to be on, really heavy on one side of the coin or really heavy on the other side of the coin, because there are strengths and weaknesses to both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, it's learning to balance all of the things and all of the personality traits, that God's given to us. So let's take a break. We'll be right back. We want to thank all of our sponsors for making this show possible: BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, Apologia, and IEW. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back with Katie. As we're talking about distractions, let's kind of define what a distraction is. Obviously we know what it looks like to be distracted, but let's actually just really kind of hone in on that word and define it.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought a lot about this as I've been studying this topic, and everybody kind of has different definitions and what they assume. But really, when you look up definitions in the dictionary and when you look at other reliable sources, you see that a distraction is really anything, and I think this part is key, anything good or bad that takes us away from what we should be prioritizing at that moment. And this is a big difference than what we tend to think of, because we just assume that everything that we don't want to be doing right now, or everything that keeps us from doing what we want to do, is a distraction, versus everything that is keeping us from doing what should be the priority right in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's tough because I want to have my list, and this is what thing I should be doing, and never deviate from that. But that's also not reality, right? I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes we can stay focused, but especially, you've got 6 kids, and as you mentioned before, you have special needs kids. So I have 2 kids. Neither of them are special needs, and we still get distracted so easily when we're trying to focus on one thing. So I imagine with 6, and having special needs in there, it would almost seem impossible to focus, not ever, but most of the time, on the thing that you're trying to focus on. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about just some practical ways that we can do this. What do we do about this? If we know we're distracted, we can recognize it. We can admit it to ourselves at least. What are some things we can do about it?
One of the first things is reducing the amount of multitasking we do. We as moms love to multitask, but there's been many studies showing that we're not really multitasking. We're shifting from one thing to another. And so really trying to block off time, especially when we're talking about homeschooling, blocking off specific homeschool hours and really protecting those hours.
Yeah.
So our school day, I have middle schoolers, and with having kids with special needs, our school day just takes longer. Um, and so we actually typically go somewhere around 8 to 2. There's breaks in there, there's lunch. It's not all working the whole time, but I'm working that whole time
Sure.
between 8 and 2. But I really protect between 9 and 12. And that is my like safety hours. And for that, I really try to not do scheduling any doctor's appointments
Hmm.
or therapies. I try not to have any play dates or, field trips we might do. That's an exception to the rule. But in general, we try to protect that 9 to 12. And it's really helped us to be able to stay a little more focused because as a distracted mom, I can bounce around within one task. But the second that I start to blend tasks and say, I can jump from math to language arts, no problem.
Hmm.
But jumping from math to laundry, then all of a sudden I get on what my husband affectionately calls if you give a mouse a cookie days, where I start everything and I finish nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, we're doing math. Oh, we need to do laundry, but I forgot to switch that laundry. I'll go upstairs and get more. And then I'm like, oh, I should make my bed. And then I need to call somebody about something. And like, it just becomes this whole thing. So if we can kind of keep like-minded tasks together and give our attention to that, and then give our attention afterwards to those things, maybe errands or phone calls, contacting people, and just
Yeah.
grouping as many like tasks together is a huge, huge help when it comes to reducing distractions.
Yeah. So when you're talking about, staying on those like-minded tasks, how do you do that with 6 kids? Because you've got all of them different. I mean, you've got a pretty big range of ages
Yes.
with your
Yeah.
kids and abilities. So how do you focus on that 9 to 12 time frame
Yes.
where you try to really stay focused on them? What does that look like in your home?
Well, part of it is I've had to learn what works for me and my personality. So something that's very distracting to me is environmental clutter. I am a very messy person, but mess
Mhm.
distracts me. And that's not always
Right.
the best blend. So with that, a lot of people do their chores with their kids after school. And I totally understand why it makes sense. But for us, I have to start the day out with a picked up house. It does not need to be like super clean, but it needs to just be picked up. So I will opt for a later start time if it means that I can have a cleared space. Um,
Yeah.
and so I feel like that's one of the big things is knowing and starting to track the distractions that you're coming across.
Hmm.
Because if you find yourself constantly cleaning during school hours, is it maybe that these things are really bothering you? And having designated times. So sometimes work will become a task for me that distracts me. I'm like, oh, I need to send this email. I need to, do this or that. And I find what helps me is to know that there is going to be a designated time for that later. And if I
Yeah.
know that between 2 and 4, I'm going to have some work hours, then I can simply jot it on a list and I know I won't forget it. And then during those work hours, I can pick that up and take that task. So it's all about prepping the time beforehand and knowing when you're going to be able to do other things. Having that peace
Yeah.
of mind really helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about lists. I
Yes.
love lists. I
Yes.
love checklists. Like I said, I would be a complete disaster. I would not be able to function. I could not do this podcast. I couldn't do anything without my checklist because I think of the things that I need to, and of course I'm the one who I'll wake up at like 4 in the morning and I'm like, oh, I got to put this on my checklist. Maybe I'm dreaming about it. I don't even know. But if I don't put it on my list, I completely forget about it. I do that
Hmm.
with grocery shopping. It drives my husband crazy because he'll say, we need this at the grocery store. And if it's not on my shopping, it could be like the most important thing. We need milk and eggs. I go to the grocery store for milk and eggs, but if it's not on my list, I will not get it. I have to have my list. I'll get everything else but the
Yeah.
milk and eggs. And I function that same way in my life. I could have the most important things to do. And if it's not on my to-do list, I just get so easily distracted.
Yeah.
And I find all the other things to do that take up my time. And so how do you, as you make your lists, Do you use something specific? Like, do you use a pad and paper? Do you use your phone? Do you use a specific app? What does
Yeah.
that look like for you?
So it's looked totally different in all different phases of life. I currently use the blend. So anything work related, I use a website called Notion. They
Okay.
have a totally free option. It's kind of the next step up from Trello, if people are familiar with Trello. And so it allows me to do a little bit more than I can do with Trello. But then for the home, I find pen and paper to be my best bet. And so I actually do a couple of interesting things with my list. I brain dump everything
Hmm.
that's in my head the night before, because I can't sleep. All those thoughts, all those movies playing in your head, like what you're talking about, keeps me from being able to sleep. And most highly distracted moms actually struggle with some form of insomnia,
Oh, wow.
because our brains just won't turn off.
Yeah.
And so with that, I find just dumping everything on a piece of paper and writing it all down. And then in the morning, I can look back at it. So that's not my official to-do list, but that is the beginning of my to-do list.
Hmm.
So I'll write anything down that I think is important. And then in the morning, I'll look over it, and 95% of it is not important. It was just what was floating around my head.
Right.
And I'll pick those important tasks, but I make sure to pick 3 tasks for my day.
Hmm.
And that's been huge because I'm like, no, I have more than I have to do. And it's like,
Right.
but if you can only get 3 done, what are those 3 tasks you're going to do? And it has made a whole world of a difference because now I'm getting the things done that are the most important and not
Hmm.
necessarily the most interesting or the most urgent, but those things that actually needed to get done. Um, and it's made a huge difference for me, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I love using a whiteboard at home.
Yes.
I don't know. There's something about physically writing it down on the board. And I'll tell you why I don't use pen and paper, because I lose it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's kind of weird. We have a pretty tidy house. I like my house to be in order. And for the most part, it's pretty clean. But for some reason, I will lose a pad of paper with my notes on it. So I like to use the whiteboard that we have in our spare room, and my phone. I use just the notes app
Yeah.
on my,
Hmm.
iPhone. And I love that it has the little, I don't think it had this when it first started, but it has the little check boxes now. And so as you list
Yes.
stuff on
Yes.
there, you can just check it off and it moves that item down to the bottom of the list. And it's
Yes.
wonderful for me because there's so much satisfaction in checking that box and watching it just move itself down to the bottom. But yeah, I could not, I couldn't live without that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about helping our children to
Hmm.
stay focused and not get easily distracted, but we're out of time. So let's come back
Yes.
tomorrow. Let's talk about that because, again, like I said, the apple does not fall far from the tree. And so my girls they're still learning along with me to stay focused on things. And, we do get the important things done that we need to get done. And I'm thankful for that. But I always feel like there's so much more we could be doing during the day if we would just learn to focus. And it's a process, it's a learning process that we're all still in. So, Katie, thank you again for being with us this
Yes.
week.
Thank you.
One more time, tell our audience where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, and on podcast streaming services at Life the Mundane. We have homeschooling content for free on YouTube and marriage and parenting content over on our podcast. I forgot to mention this on Monday, but I also am one of the contributors at Made to Homeschool, which is an online community where you can kind of hang out with online content creators and get to have that encouragement. And so we love that as well.
Okay. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you've not left a review for this podcast, would you please take a minute to do that, whatever app you're listening to it on? Or if you're watching this on YouTube, would you like and subscribe and share this podcast with your friends? That is the best way for us to get the word out about the podcast and for people to be encouraged. So if you're encouraged by it, your friends will be too. Share it with them. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye.
A mom said to me one time, "Aren't you worried about sheltering your children?" And I said to her, we care more about sheltering tomato plants in the culture right now than we do about our precious children. And so if someone wants to accuse me of sheltering my children, my answer is always absolutely yes. I will shelter my child until I know my child can stand up against the elements of the culture so that they can grow to maturity. And we slowly begin to remove the shelter from around them as we see that they are mature and that they understand the battle lines around them and can engage the culture from a position of strength rather than weakness.
The big thing is really looking at those environmental distractions. I know we talked about that on Wednesday, but those environmental distractions for kids are huge. We as homeschool moms oftentimes look at all the Pinterest boards of all the pretty homeschool rooms, and we want to have the charts on the walls and the fun colors and all the paintings and all the things. And in reality, typically the highly distracted homeschooler children are going to get distracted by those things. And they actually do better typically in a more minimal environment